Hey everybody, my name is Paul Eston Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. Welcome to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/BoyGreen25. We have another bonus mock draft Monday here, and every time for this segment, we bring in a special guest from either the draft world, college football, you name it, you got it. And we got a very special guest joining us today. His name is Bruce Feldman. He's a college football insider for The Athletic and, quite frankly, the mastermind behind the freak list. Let's bring him in. What's poppin', Bruce?
Thanks for having me. By the way, I like your shirt. I didn't see it before because of the font, and then
Yes.
Miami fans will smile when they know about it.
Yeah, there you go. We got a little bit of a sponsor deal. ZachWilsonIsGood.com, this local company here locally, decided to just do something simple with insert random jet names isgood.com, and they've been selling like hotcakes. So maybe the keep it simple, stupid idea seems to work out there for the marketing world. But appreciate the shout out there, Bruce. Something else, if you're a fan of this, well, I'll tell you, I'm a fan of the Freaks list, and it's interesting. You know, I've been an avid reader of it for a long time, but I don't know if I've ever heard the genesis. It's a cool concept and something. It's must read material for all of the football world. Where did all that come from?
So I don't know exactly when the first. I know it started around 2003, 2004 when I was still at ESPN. And it was an off-season idea because I'd hear about these players in certain programs, not necessarily always the best player, but just somebody who kind of inside the program, there was a huge buzz about this player, whether it was this guy could vertical jump 45 inches or it was this freakishly athletic 325-pound guy. There was all sorts of ways that it factored into it. I mean, it was also around the same time as Calvin Johnson was playing college football. So there was plenty of examples of it. And it was just kind of one of these things that you can kind of quantify, but you can't. And so I was doing it initially, was top 10, did top 10 for probably 4 or 5 years. Then it kept growing because I started getting a lot more buy-in because I would talk to coaches and some strength coaches for it. But then as it grew and I started getting feedback from different people in the football world, other players, scouts became a big, kind of a big boon for this because over the last, 6 years or so, I've been a sideline reporter for Fox Sports. Before games, I'll be on the field pregame, and a lot of times I'll run into coaches who will ask me about the Freaks List story, or we'll talk about it. And then you start to develop more sources in that world, and it's grown and grown and grown to the point where I went from 40 to 50 to 100 now. And even this year before the draft, we kind of updated ours just of guys who were in the draft. And I started talking to guys who were maybe on my list last summer, but also like, hey, who you training with? Who's kind of somebody you think will really wow people? And so it's like you really get more player intel on that. It's just been a fun project, and it's the thing I'm known for most work wise, and I'm good with it just because the response has been really awesome.
Oh, yeah, and for good reason. Again, it is must-read material for any football fan. If you haven't been checking it out, you should every year. And it's interesting, the blend that happened with the Freaks List and really your mock draft that you dropped on April 4th on The Athletic. Again, guys, make sure you check it out. And the interesting thing about this, there's a little caption before it all starts, and you say, after spending the past 6 weeks talking to coaches, experts inside college football, as well as NFL sources, you put a mock draft together based on that information. And because this YouTube channel is solely dedicated to New York Jets content, I have no other way to go but to go to the 4th overall, where you have your number one guy who cracked the Freaks List this upcoming year, which was Evan Neal. And you haven't gone to the Jets. But before I get to Evan Neal specifically, the first line I find interesting. You have it, the choice between Ike Ekwonu or Evan Neal is made easier with the Texans drafting Ekwonu. And I want to ask you, based on everything you're hearing, is that the decision for the Jets at 4? Is it between the best offensive lineman available, which would be Evan Neal or Ekwonu?
Well, I think when you're talking about the talent that could be there sitting, at 4,
Sure.
when you're talking about what your franchise just invested in Zach Wilson, really talented, quarterback, but young. And we've seen plenty of examples, whether it's Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City or even Joe Burrow last year late in the season. As good as your quarterback is, if he does not have help on the line, that you could run into some issues. And so I think with either one of those guys, Icky or Evan Neal, I think you have guys who are going to be as close to sure things probably as there is in the draft of being high level, long-term starters who are going to go to Pro Bowls and be really good. Just when you talk to guys who coach them, you talk to coaches who face them, I think they are, they're not absolute, but nobody is, right? Whether that's, whether it's Aiden Hutchinson, I think he's going to be a really good player, but I don't know if I would say he's the wow first pick in the draft kind of guy. You can talk about some of the other players on the defensive side of the ball, some of the other edge rushers. I think there's stuff that you can chip away. Whereas these two linemen, I mean, now some of the defensive line coaches I talked to about Evan Neal, I think there was a couple guys who were like, you know what, he might be better off as a guard. But then there's other people who think, you know what, he's plenty athletic. He's certainly flexible at that size where he can be a really, really good left tackle. And having talked to Kyle Flood, who coached him earlier in his career at Alabama, the offensive line coach there, and he's had some NFL first round picks on the offensive line. He gushed about him, not just about his size, obviously, and athleticism, but also really about his approach and how he had the attitude and the demeanor and the mindset of I'm going to get the most out of my ability from the time he showed up there. And that's not always the case with high level recruits.
So let's go into it. Evan Neal was your number one freak on the 2021 list. Again, there's a lot of interesting nuggets and stories in there for people that want to read the full thing, but what's the one thing that stood out that made him the number one guy on that list?
Just really unique flexibility at that size, 6'7". He was 350 at one point. He's got down to 335 in the draft process, but just really unique agility for being that big. I mean, in a lot of ways, people had told me at Inside Alabama that if you said he was 6'7", 250 and moved that way, they'd be like, that's pretty good. The fact that he was 6'7", 350 just blew people's minds there. And, obviously Becton was very freakish in his own way. I think in here you have a guy who has played at an even higher level for 3 years in a program where, against really top caliber defensive linemen in a lot of big games, been coached, in a couple of different schemes by a couple of different people. I think that bodes well for him. If the Jets end up with him, I think Jets fans will be very happy with him, even if an offensive lineman isn't always the most glamorous or glitzy thing to take.
I think there's no question they should be elated getting someone of that type of resume coming in there. The other pick for the Jets that you mock was at number 10 overall. You had the Jets going Drake London, who's a very interesting player. And the other interesting thing about this mock, again, people, you should check it out, is you have coaching and NFL sources under each pick of quotes that they said about the player. And the one I tweeted out that really made this interview possible from me plugging it and then you reaching out and tweeting about it was the Drake London quote that said this from a coach / NFL source saying on Drake London, quote, I think he's one of the best receivers I've ever seen. He can really high point the ball. He runs routes like a little guy, getting in and out of his cuts. He's not afraid to get dirty. People may question his top end speed, and he probably won't wow you, but his functional football speed with his pads on is really good. That's such a wow statement, especially for a class that doesn't seem to have a consensus number one wide receiver. Why does it seem like there are so many people high on Drake London?
Yeah, I mean, first, the idea behind my mock and what I feel like is different about it is compared to a lot of other stuff that maybe is out there from draft analysts and media is I was really looking to say, okay, from the guys who either were part of the programs these guys came from, but also most of the intel is from guys who coached and faced these players. So what's different is a lot of times somebody can watch film of a player and they'll think, they can look at how they move and whatnot, and maybe reaction time and different things. But these guys know exactly how they're trying to attack these players. There's no guessing or figuring out he's trying to do. No, these guys know exactly. They've studied them on film and then they play them in the game. So they probably have as real an insight into the players as almost anybody you're going to talk to for it. So that's what I wanted to get at. And in this process, I mean, what you have, I think a lot of people look at as the top 4 receivers. Maybe you put Trey Burks from Arkansas in there as well as the 5th, but you have 2 receivers from Ohio State who are run exceptionally well, have really good hands, good ball skills. Then you have, in Jamison Williams, another guy who started his career at Ohio State, really explosive, made a lot of plays at Alabama, little, touch bigger than them or touch taller, but coming off a big injury in the national title game. Drake London is a big receiver. He's a legit 6'4", 220. He's young. He doesn't turn 21 almost till the end of the summer. Was an exceptional basketball player, could have played basketball at Virginia, was considering that. And he was a dominant player on a really bad team in a program that was just in complete disarray. And I think, just from the people I've talked to, that pops for a lot of people, because when things are bad, when things are struggling, people are getting written off, and a player to still be a dominant player and perform that way, I think that's a great sign for future success. Because a lot of times I've talked to coaches who are like, yeah, this particular player, I'll use the example of Kayvon Thibodeau. They were like, he struggled early and he kind of shut it down. And there's a lot of times you'll hear that kind of chatter about a player when things aren't going great. If he's the running back who was like 7 carries for 14 yards, what does he look like in the second half? It's just, I think for Drake London to be that guy. I mean, one of the coaches I talked to said he reminds him a lot of Mike Evans. Both former high-level basketball players, probably not seen as elite recruits when they were coming out. And he's turned out, Evans obviously turned out to be a terrific NFL receiver.
Sure.
He's not quite as big as Mike Evans, but I do think you're talking about a guy who probably is the best big receiver in this draft.
One criticism that I've heard from people, and I'm curious your thoughts based on everyone you've talked to, they say separation issues. They think that, if that's a problem in college, only imagine in the NFL when you're facing better and stronger corners. What do you say to those people based on things that you've heard on that criticism?
I don't think he's going to be, Jamison Williams is a much more explosive athlete.
Sure.
The 2 Ohio State receivers, I think, are better than that. Again, the coaches I've talked to think he will get open and he will be a playmaker, and he can be really dynamic when he gets the ball in his hands. And I think NFL Open is much different than college Open. So I think when you have a guy who can make contested catches, with the basketball skills, I think he will be a very good security blanket for Zach Wilson going forward.
What do you think was the most surprising thing that you gathered from putting this mock together? Was there, again, because you gathered all this intel to be able to put this mock together and put different sources in, was there something you heard or a player that appeared a little higher than you would have thought that made you scratch your go, wow, didn't see that one coming, that there was some level of surprise heading in that you didn't expect?
Just the level of respect and for Devin Lloyd, the linebacker at Utah.
Yes.
I mean, he was a terrific player, but he might have been the one guy that nobody had anything negative to say about. I talked to 6 different coaches. They raved about his playmaking ability. They raved about his ability to tackle, his versatility. There's just so many things that look back to last year's draft. I don't think it's fair to compare him to Micah Parsons. They're used differently. Micah Parsons to me is a generational talent. He's different than any linebacker that's come out of college in a while. But this guy, I think, there's good linebackers in this draft. There's a bunch of them. I just think this guy is probably the surest thing in terms of he will come in no matter what you do, and he will make your team better, and he will be a really, really productive player who's going to make a ton of plays and give you a lot of production. I think whether that means he's the 5th pick in the draft or the 15th pick in the draft, I don't think team that gets him is going to be disappointed when they get him.
Bruce, last one before we get you out of here. How many quarterbacks end up going in round 1? We heard that this was a terrible class, but somehow, some way, it seems like those guys always work their way in there.
Well, there's just such a desperation for quarterbacks. I think it's a really underwhelming class. I think you may have Kenny Pickett go higher than people think his ability level is. I don't think anyone thinks definitely top 10 talent, but they're the Panthers sitting there at number 6. They really have a coach who needs to win now. Kenny Pickett is the guy who's probably most ready to come in and play because he played in a more of an NFL style offense. He's got a lot of experience. He's very bright. He's a good athlete. I think Matt Rule, the coach there before he was a coach at Baylor, was the head coach at Temple. And once upon a time, Kenny Pickett was committed to play for him. So I think there's a lot of familiarity there. Beyond that, I mean, the guy with probably the most physical tools is Malik Willis from Liberty, but he played in Hugh Freeze's RPO offense. I think there's a big learning curve there. I could see him going late where somebody says, all right, we don't need him to win right now. We're going to take a chance on him. Then you have Desmond Ridder, who's played a lot of football. He tests well. People really like his character. The part that, that I've heard that people have some hesitation on is he going to be accurate enough to really be a good NFL quarterback? I think if you take him late at the first round, there's less of a risk than you're saying if you're taking him as in the top 10. And to me, the biggest wild card is Matt Corral from Ole Miss. He has got a really quick release, really good arm, moves very well. He's tough as can be, but he's not that thick and, muscled up. And how durable is he going to be if he's playing like a linebacker and he's going up against NFL linebackers? And there are some maturity questions with him. As one NFL source put it, it was like, he had a bumpy path to get to where he got to. He seemed to have a really good relationship with Lane Kiffin, but you got to wonder, how is he going to be if he has to be leading men with families in a locker room? Can he handle that? How will he be as a face of a franchise? If he's the 32nd pick of the draft, there's probably less pressure and less expectation on that than if he's maybe where you think his arm talent will tell you that he belongs.
Well, Bruce, you're one of the legends in the business. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, my man. And it's cool that we were able to cross paths like this. Big fan of your work. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it.